Good evening and welcome to session 9, business economics. First of all, I want to see any of you is going to volunteer for your individual presentation. Are you ready for your individual presentation? Is any of you going to volunteer?
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. I was not. I couldn't see the lecture last week, so I was not aware of the individual presentation this week.
So no problem. What we will do is we will leave it for next session. Next session is your final chance for presenting in the class. We will leave it for then. So we will focus on the final slides and chapters in the class, and also discuss your final project, which I already sent you by email. So for now, we just focus on the continuation of slides and the chapter.
Okay.
So
okay.
Beautiful. So as we discussed and saw a short video for this session, we're going to talk about aggregate supply and aggregate demand this session. So basically, after studying this chapter, you'll be able to understand what determines aggregate supply, what determines aggregate demand, explain macroeconomic equilibrium, explain the effects of changes in aggregate supply and aggregate demand on economic growth, inflation, and business cycles, and explain economic growth, inflation, and business cycles by using ASAD model. So production of prices. What forces bring persistent and rapid expansion of real GDP? We talk about GDP, gross domestic product, which is the total services and products produced within the boundaries of a country. So what actually brings that persistent and rapid expansion of GDP? We want to expand our GDP. What is it? What's the cause? What causes inflation? Why do we have business cycles? And how do policy actions by the government and Federal Reserve affect output and prices? So aggregate supply fundamentals. Let's understand what is the aggregate supply. So the aggregate quantity of goods and services supplied depends on three factors: quantity of labor, quantity of capital, and the state of technology. So the aggregate production function shows how quantity of real GDP supply, which is called Y, depends on labor, capital, and technology. So aggregate supply, as you can see, is inclusive of three major factors: labor, capital, and technology. And we want to understand how the aggregate production function shows that real GDP supply. So the aggregate production function is written as Y equals the function of labor, capital, and technology. So in words, the quantity of real GDP supply depends on, is a function of the quantity of labor, the quantity of capital, and the state of technology. The larger labor, capital, and technology is, the greater is your aggregate supply. So you want to increase your labor as much as you can, you want to increase your capital as much as you can, and your technology as much as you can. So these are your means towards your goal, which is increasing your GDP and aggregate supply. At any given time, the quantity of capital and the state of technology are fixed, but the quantity of labor can vary. So the capital that you have, which is the money, the cash at hand you have, and the state of technology is going to be fixed at any time, but your labor is going to change. So the higher the real wage rate, the smaller is the quantity of labor demanded. and the greater is the quantity of labor supply. So when the wages, when the salaries go up, you will see that the labor that is demanded is going to be lower. But when the wages are lower, then the quantity of labor demanded is higher, but the supply of labor will go down. So the wage rate that makes the quantity of labor demanded equal to quantity of supply is equilibrium wage rate. And at that wage, the level of employment is natural rate of unemployment. So that's important. That's why you see when the government increased the minimum wage, like President Obama just increased the minimum wage. So that actually has a backlash from the investors, from private companies, from entrepreneurs, because they say when you increase your minimum wage, then of course the quantity of labor supply is going to be more. There will be more people with the skills and the labor to be able to work because they like that minimum wage, but then the employers will not because they reduce their employment because they don't want to pay higher, so they employ less employees. So at the level where the quantity of labor supplied by the employees and the quantity of labor demanded by employers, when these are equal, we are at the natural rate of unemployment. Okay? We call it equilibrium. So aggregate supply, we distinguish two time frames associated with different states of labor: long-run aggregate supply and short-term aggregate supply. So long-run aggregate supply is the macroeconomic long-run is a time frame that is sufficiently long for all adjustments to be made. So the real GDP equals potential GDP, and there is full employment. So when you're looking at a time frame which is long enough for adjustments, all adjustments to happen, and your real GDP and potential GDP are the same, we call it aggregate supply. Long-run aggregate supply. And then the long-run aggregate supply curve is the relationship between the quantity of real GDP and the price level when real GDP equals potential GDP. So look at here. So figure 6.1, as you can see, shows a long-run aggregate supply curve with potential GDP of $10 trillion. The long-run aggregate supply curve is a vertical because potential GDP is independent of price level, along as the long-run aggregate supply curve, all prices and wages rates vary by same percentage, so that relative prices and real wages rate remain constant. So long-run aggregate supply, the macroeconomic short run, is period during which the real GDP has fallen below or risen above the potential GDP. At the same time, the unemployment rate has risen above or fallen below the unemployment rate. And the short-run aggregate supply is a relationship between the quantity of real GDP and the price levels in the short run when the money wage rate and the prices of other resources and potential GDP remain constant. Okay, so as you can look at here, it shows a short-run aggregate supply curve, and the short-run aggregate supply curve rises in the price level with no change in the money wage rate and other input prices, increases the quantity of real GDP supply. The short-term aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, as you you can see it's going upward. It's upward sloping because a rise in the price level with no change in the cost includes firms to bear a higher marginal cost and increase production, and a fall in price levels with no change in cost induces firms to decrease production to lower the marginal cost. So it's just the direction of cost. So as cost goes up, you will see the direct change, and as it goes up, it goes down, you'll see a direct change as well. So along the short-term aggregate supply curve, real GDP might be above potential GDP or below, as you can see here. On the left-hand side, you see the real GDP below the potential GDP, and then at the right-hand side, you see the real GDP above the potential GDP. So movements along the long-term aggregate supply and short-term aggregate supply curve. So summarizes it, you just learned about the long-run aggregate supply and short-term aggregate supply. A change in the price level with an equal percentage change in the money wage rate causes a movement along the long-run aggregate supply curve. So a change in the price levels with no change in the money wage rate causes a movement along the short-run aggregate supply curve. Okay. Do you have any questions? What's the name, Bobby? So just mute your microphone. Please make sure you mute your microphone. Okay, thank you. So changes in aggregate supply. When potential GDP increases, both long-run aggregate supply and short-run aggregate supply curves shift rightward. Potential GDP changes for three reasons: change in full employment quantity of labor, change in quantity of capital, and advance in technology. So all these three, like technology, capital, and labor, will change the potential GDP. So these factors shift in the long-run and short-run aggregate supply curve, as you can see. So you'll see the effect of changing the money wage rate on aggregate supply. A rise in the money wage rate decreases short-run aggregate supply and shifts the short-run aggregate supply leftward, but it has no effect on the long-run aggregate supply. So aggregate demand, the quantity of real GDP demanded, which is Y, is the total amount of final goods and services produced in the country. Now here is the United States, it could be in Afghanistan or any country, that people, businesses, governments, and foreigners plan to buy. So this quantity is the sum of consumption expenditures, which is C, and then investments, which is I, government purchases, which is G, and exports, net exports, which is exports minus imports. So the quantity, the aggregate demand equals consumption expenditures, investment, government expenses, and net exports. So buying plans depend on many factors. Some of the main ones are price levels. When the price levels goes up, the demand will go down, and vice versa. Expectations of the buyers, fiscal and money policy, and world economy. So aggregate demand curve is the relationship between the quantity of real GDP demanded and the price level. So the aggregate demand curve plus the quantity of real GDP demanded against the price level. So let me show you something. Okay. Okay, let me show you a video clip that I was looking for. This is on the real versus potential GDP. So I want to show you that, so that might be able to clarify even better.
What did you do today? Maybe you trimmed hedges, fixed your car, baked cupcakes. Add up the value of all this work and give it a name. Let's call it GPY, the gross product of you. Some days, the gross product of you is high, and some days, well, it's a little less high. Of course, everyone has a GPY, and if we add up all the GPYs, we'd know the total value produced in our economy every day. Government statisticians carry out this kind of adding up every 3 months, and they call the resulting value our national GDP, or gross domestic product. GDP doesn't include the stuff we do for ourselves. So when we cook our own meals and cut our own lawns, that's not counted. But generally speaking, everything people living in the United States have produced for sale in our economy gets counted. At the Federal Reserve, it's our job to set monetary policies that best promote maximum employment and price stability. To do this, we need to know how much our economy is producing. And we need to have an idea about how much our economy could produce if it were working at its full potential. That's called potential GDP. So what's your potential? How does the gross product of you compare to the potential gross product of you? Figuring out your potential is tricky, so let's set a few ground rules. First, your potential isn't the maximum you could produce. After all, you'll need some time to rest, so let's not include the stuff you could have produced on your time off. If you didn't trim hedges because you were enjoying a ball game, we won't count that. And let's not include the stuff you can't do because you don't have the capacity. So if you didn't bake cupcakes because the oven is broken, we won't count that in your potential. On the other hand, if you wanted to work more hours repairing cars, but business has been slow and your manager has cut back your hours, we will include the hours that you didn't work as part of your potential. Now to expand the idea of your potential to our national potential. When government statisticians gauge our national potential, we call it our potential GDP. Potential GDP is the value of all the things we have the ability and desire to produce in our economy, even if we didn't produce all of it. If GDP is different than potential GDP, then we have a problem. The economy isn't employed at its full potential. If the economy is operating below its potential, it means that there simply isn't enough demand to keep us all fully employed, and the policies of the Federal Reserve will need to be adjusted to promote more spending in the economy. But GDP can also exceed potential GDP. In this case, the economy is being overworked and most likely will experience rising prices. The policies of the Federal Reserve will need to be adjusted to keep spending in check. Congress has asked the Federal Reserve to promote maximum employment and stable prices, sometimes called our dual mandate. We do this by setting our policies so that, over time, GDP and potential GDP are in alignment. A precise measurement of our potential GDP is tricky. In fact, this is the subject of frequent debate among economists. At the Federal Reserve, we spend lots of time I'm trying to gauge how close the economy is to its full potential. But that's what the Federal Reserve's dual mandate is all about, to make sure our monetary policies are calibrated so the machinery of the U.S. economy is operating at its full potential. If you'd like to know more about GDP and other economic topics, check out the resources on our website at frbatlanta.org.
Okay, very well. So let's let me put this back. Okay, so that was a good explanation of potential versus real GDP. So I thought maybe that would be helpful for you guys to understand what we're talking about. So as you can see, aggregate demand slopes downward for two reasons: a wealth effect and substitution effect. So those two could change the aggregate demand. So wealth effect, a rise in the price level, other things remaining the same, decreases the quantity of real wealth, which is money, bonds, stocks. So to restore their real wealth, people increase savings and decrease spending. So the quantity of real GDP demanded decreases. So a rise in prices decreases the wealth, the real wealth of people. Similarly, a fall in prices and price levels, other things remaining the same, increases the quantity of real GDP, real wealth. So with more real wealth, people decrease savings and increase spending. So quantity of real GDP demanded increases. So intertemporal substitution effect. A rise in the price level, other things remaining the same, decreases the real value of money and rises the interest rates. So faced with a higher interest rate, people try to borrow and spend less. So the quantity of real GDP demanded decreases. Similarly, a fall in price levels increases the real value of money and lower the interest rate. So faced with lower interest rates, people borrow and spend more, so the quantity of real GDP demanded increases. International substitution effect. A rise in the price level, other things remaining the same, increases the prices of domestic goods relative to foreign goods. So imports increases and export decreases, which decreases the quantity of real GDP demanded. So similarly, a fall in the price level, other things remaining the same, decreases the level of domestic goods relative to foreign goods. So imports decreases and export increases. So this increases the quantity of real GDP demand. Okay. So changes in aggregate demand, a change in any influence on buying plans other than price levels changes the aggregate demand. And those are expectations, fiscal and monetary policy, and world economy, similar to the aggregate supply. Whereas in aggregate supply, was full employment, capital, and technology. And then on aggregate demand is expectation, fiscal monetary policy, and world economy. So expectations about future income, future inflation, future profits change aggregate demand. Increases in expected future income increases people's consumption today and increases in aggregate demand. A rise in the expected inflation rate makes buying goods cheaper today and increases aggregate demand. An increase in expected future profits boosts firms' investment, which increases aggregate demand. And fiscal policy is the government's attempt to influence economic activity by changing its taxes, spending, deficit, and debt policy. A tax cut or an increase in transfer payments increases households' disposable income, aggregate income minus taxes plus transfer payments. An increase in disposable income increases consumption expenditure and increases aggregate demand. So in fiscal policy, governments try to influence the economy, like change the deficit levels, increase the spending. So tax cuts increases household disposable income and aggregate demand minus taxable taxes plus transfer payments. So so basically, disposable income is their aggregate income, total income minus transfer payments and like taxes that they pay. And increasing disposable income increases the consumption level. So government tries to play a role once they find out that it's useful and beneficial. Then because government purchases of goods and services are one component of aggregate demand, an increase in government purchases increases aggregate demand. Monetary policy, it changes in the interest rate and quantity of money. An increasing quantity of money increases buying power and increases aggregate demand. So monetary policy focuses on rates and interest rates normally, and also quantity of money. So the measure of money will change. A cut in interest rate increases expenditure and increases aggregate demand. So the world economy influences aggregate demand in two ways, though. A fall in the foreign exchange rate lowers the price of domestic goods and services relative to foreign goods and services, and that increases the exports, decreases imports, and increases aggregate demand. And increasing foreign income increases the demand for U.S. exports and increases aggregate demand. So as you can see, fall in foreign exchange, fall in the foreign exchange rate is going to help. So as you can see in the figure, changes in aggregate demand. When aggregate demand increases, the aggregate demand curve shifts rightwards, and when aggregate demand decreases, it goes leftward. Short-run macroeconomic equilibrium occurs when the quantity of real GDP demanded equals the quantity of real GDP supply at the point of intersection of the aggregate demand curve and short-term aggregate supply curve. So these two should sort of intersect with each other. Figure 6a illustrates the short-run equilibrium. If real GDP is below equilibrium GDP, firms increase production and raise prices to get to the equilibrium GDP. And if real GDP is above equilibrium GDP, firms decrease production and lower that GDP. These changes bring a movement along the short-term aggregate supply curve toward equilibrium. In short run, equilibrium real GDP can be greater than or less than potential GDP. So long-run macroeconomic equilibrium. So long-run macroeconomic equilibrium occurs when real GDP equals potential GDP, and when the economy is on its long-term aggregate supply curve. So macroeconomic equilibrium, as you can see in the figure, long-run equilibrium occurs when the aggregate demand and long-run aggregate supply curves intersect, and it results when the money wage has adjusted to put the short-run aggregate supply curve through the long-run equilibrium. So economic growth and inflation illustrates economic growth and inflation. This chart is showing that. And then economic growth occurs because the quantity of labor grows, capital is accumulated, and technology is advancing, all of which increases potential GDP and bring a rightward shift towards the long-run aggregate supply curve. So as we discussed before, the capital, labor, and technology is going to add to the potential GDP. So inflation occurs because the quantity of money grows faster than potential GDP, which increases the aggregate demand, while more in the long run aggregate supply. So as you can see, the aggregate demand curve shifts rightward faster than the rightward shift for long run aggregate supply. So let's see. Okay, so let me show you another video that could also bring some light into this topic. It shows some. Okay.
Under the three macroeconomic goals, price stability, low unemployment, and high and sustained economic growth, is there a tool that we can use to allow us to understand how price level, P, unemployment, U, and real GDP, or quantity of goods and services, Q, are determined? Well, we already have a tool, sort of. We'll just need to adapt it. It's the market tool, the supply and demand diagram. Think about it. The supply and demand in a particular market determine the price and quantity in that market. The issue is that the supply and demand in a particular market help me define the price of one product, not the price level of all products, and the quantity of one product, not the quantity of all goods and services, also known as GDP. The single market supply and demand diagram is actually pretty simple to modify into a macroeconomic model. Instead of looking at the demand for one product or service, we look at the aggregate demand for all products and services. And rather than the supply of a single commodity or service, let's use the aggregate supply of all commodities and services. Then, the equilibrium will represent the macroeconomic equilibrium. Rather than the equilibrium price of a single product or service, it yields the equilibrium price level of the prices for all goods and services. And instead of the equilibrium quantity of a single commodity, the equilibrium quantity of all goods and services, i.e. the real GDP, is yielded. So let's take a closer look at our modified market model, starting with the aggregate demand. Whereas demand for a single product is a collection of all the quantities demanded for that product at various prices and exhibiting an inverse relationship, the aggregate demand for all goods and services is an inverse relationship between the price level in the economy and the quantity of all goods and services demanded, or a collection of all the aggregate quantities demanded for all goods and services at various price levels in the economy. Why is there an inverse relationship? That is, why are fewer goods and services demanded when price levels are higher? Well, for a number of reasons, really. If the overall price level for all goods and services is increasing, other things remaining equal, the existing income cannot buy as much as it used to. Another reason is that as the domestic price level rises, foreign goods start to look much more attractive. Households, businesses, and the foreign sector shy away from buying our more expensive goods. Also, higher prices tend to drive interest rates up. More on that later when we discuss credit markets. But that also depresses the amount of goods and services that the four sectors can buy or want to buy. Just like demand for a single product, a change in the price level will not shift aggregate demand, but only cause a movement along it. Is there anything that can shift aggregate demand? Sure. At a given price level, anything that changes total expenditures will change the overall aggregate demand. Do you remember who makes expenditures on goods and services? The household sector, the business sector, the government sector, and the foreign sector. This means that anything other than the price level that affects household consumption, C, business investment, I, government spending, G, or net exports, X, will shift aggregate demand. For example, in the 1990s, the U.S. stock market really boomed, and many households found themselves, as the market climbed, with increased wealth. This led to increased spending, or a rightward shift of aggregate demand. Time to think. For discussion in our next class, what kinds of things other than prices could cause a change in 1. Consumption, 2. Investment, 3. Government spending, or 4. Net exports. Now, what about aggregate supply? The aggregate supply is the direct relationship between the price level in the economy and the aggregate quantity of goods and services supplied. The aggregate supply curve, then, is just a collection of all price level, aggregate quantity supplied combinations. Why is aggregate supply upward sloping? Well, for pretty much the same reasons that a single product supply curve is upward sloping: cost and profit. As the price level rises in an economy, other things staying the same, more producers, even inefficient, high-cost producers, can produce and survive. At lower price levels, only the lowest cost producers can continue. On the profit side, at higher price levels, other things staying the same, profits are higher, giving greater incentive to produce. Time to think. For our next class, what could shift aggregate supply? Again, changes in price level will only cause a movement along aggregate supply. What types of changes could occur that would have a broad effect on all types of production throughout the economy? Where aggregate demand and aggregate supply meet, we find our macroeconomic equilibrium, the price level, the quantity of goods and services, or GDP, and even an implied unemployment level. More GDP means more jobs and lower unemployment. Lower GDP means fewer jobs and higher unemployment. How will changes in aggregate demand and aggregate supply affect prices, GDP, and unemployment? Next time, does the economy self-adjust?
Okay. Let me put this back. So that was very explanatory of what we've been talking about. So what's the business cycle? Business cycle occurs because aggregate demand and the short-run aggregate supply fluctuate. But the money wage rate does not change rapidly enough to keep the real GDP at potential GDP. So the short run and the total aggregate demand, they don't keep up with regard to speed. So a below full employment equilibrium is an equilibrium in which potential GDP is higher than the real GDP. The amount by which the potential GDP exceeds the real GDP is called the recessionary gap, right? Macroeconomic equilibrium. A long-run equilibrium is an equilibrium in which the potential GDP and real GDP are the same. An above full employment equilibrium is when the real GDP is higher than potential GDP. And the amount by which the real GDP exceeds potential GDP is inflationary gap. So the economy moves from one type of short-run equilibrium to another. Real GDP fluctuates around potential GDP. So Fluctuations in aggregate demand. So figure 612 shows the effects of an increase in aggregate demand, as you can see. And then starting a long-run equilibrium, increasing aggregate demand shifts the aggregate demand curve rightward, right? We talked about it. So firms increase production and raise prices, and movement along the short-run aggregate supply. So real GDP increases, the price level rises, and in short-run equilibrium, there is an inflationary gap. So the money wage rate begins to rise, and short-run aggregate supply begins to decrease. The short-run aggregate supply curve shifts leftward, and the price level rises, and the real GDP decreases until it has returned to potential GDP. So for some reason, I don't know why this figure is not being shown here, but probably you will be able to see it on the email that I sent you. So starting at long-run equilibrium, a rise in the price of oil decreases short-run aggregate demand supply, and short-run aggregate supply curve shifts leftward. So real GDP decreases and the price level rises. So the combination of recession combined with inflation is called stagflation. And then we have U.S. economic growth, inflation, and cycles. So changes in real GDP and price levels each year, which we can't see because this chart is not showing. Inflation and long-run economic. I'll try to show you. Yeah, these are. Oh, they're not shown in the slides as well. Okay, I'll see what's the problem. I don't know why. Okay, I'll try to find a good video that gives you a good. Okay, I think let me show you this video.
Then you know that fiscal policy, changes in government spending, and if you're an economist who believes in an active role for the government in managing the economy, then you know that fiscal policy, changes in government spending, and or taxation to achieve particular macroeconomic goals is one type of tool that you can use. But did you know that you can stimulate or slow spending by increasing or decreasing the amount of money that's available, By definition, monetary policy is changes to the money supply in order to achieve particular macroeconomic goals. Unlike fiscal policy, which in the case of the U.S. is jointly driven by Congress and the President, monetary policy in the U.S. is controlled by our central bank, the Federal Reserve. But more about the Fed in episode 31. For right now, if we're talking about changing the money supply, the first questions I have are, 1, what exactly is money? And 2, what exactly is the money supply? By definition, money is any good that is widely accepted for the purposes of exchange and in the repayment of debts. Over the years, many items have been used as money. Coins and paper, yes, but also shells, furs, cigarettes. As long as the item is widely accepted for the purposes of exchange and in the repayment of debts, that item serves as money. To serve well as money, though, there are 3 basic functions of money that must be fulfilled. 1, money serves as a medium of exchange. Without money, we would have to barter or trade, and transactions become much more difficult. Oh, barter works fine when there's a double coincidence of wants. You have something I want, and I have something you want. But if we don't, transactions become much more complex. Okay, here's an example. You want to learn economics, and I can provide that service for you. I want someone to babysit, and that's a service you can provide for me. But what if a student wants to learn economics from me and offers me golf lessons in return? I have no interest in golf, so that student will have to find someone else to trade with, then come back and trade with me. If only we had money, something we would all accept for exchanges, how much easier this transaction would be. 2, the second function money needs to serve is as a unit of account, i.e., money gives us a common measurement in which values are expressed. For example, what if there is no money and you want to learn economics at this college? There are multiple instructors. What if one wants to be paid in babysitting, another in computer help, and another in pet sitting, and so on? It becomes very difficult to tell who has the best price. But if every instructor charges in the same item, the accepted money, it becomes very clear who has the lowest price. 3, the third function that money needs to serve is as a store of value. That is, money maintains its value over time. This enables saving, lending, and borrowing. Do we need to have money? No, an economy could function without money, but transactions would be much more cumbersome. Money helps the economy move along more smoothly, reducing transactions costs. Now that we know something about money, what is the definition of the money supply, i.e., what's included in the money supply? Well, there are actually multiple official versions of the money supply. Let's start with the narrowest definition, M1. M1 includes the components of money that are most easily and immediately converted to goods and services, or the most liquid assets, currency held outside banks, checkable deposits, and traveler's checks. The M2 money supply is actually the most common definition. It includes everything in M1 plus assets that are slightly more difficult to convert to goods and services, like small denomination time deposits, that is, CDs, where you'll pay a penalty for cashing in early, or savings deposits, money market accounts, etc. M3 then includes everything in M2 plus longer-term CDs and financial agreements. That is, M3 contains elements that are more difficult yet to convert to goods and services. Understanding what's included in the money supply is important in understanding how the money supply can actually be controlled and changed in order to manipulate the economy. Next time, creating money.
Okay. So that's for money, which also needs to be considered. Like all the, it's like a medium of all these transactions that we're dealing with. So let me stop that. Okay. So Okay. What I want to do, I want to show you the video on other topics that was no pictures. Okay, what I will show you is going to be the exchange rate, as I discussed that, and talk about unemployment. Okay.
So, right.
And okay, right here. Let's see these. These are also what we discussed. There we go.
There are three macroeconomic goals that we want to keep an eye on to determine the health of any economy. 1, stable prices. 2, low unemployment. And 3, high and sustained economic growth. The challenge for us right now is to figure out how each of these goals will be measured and what each of these goals means. For now, let's just address the first goal, stable prices. First of all, in this context, what do we mean by price? Since this is a macroeconomic goal, we aren't talking about the price of a single product, but rather the price of all products, some kind of aggregate price or a weighted average of all the prices, a representative price index. While there are many price indices out there, which price index you use often depends on the type of question you want to ask. The most common is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Sometimes you'll hear about the Core Index, which is essentially CPI that leaves out food and energy prices. These two are typically the most volatile areas, i.e. changing or fluctuating the most, and can make it look like the average of all prices is changing, when in fact everything other than food and energy is pretty stable. How is such a price index constructed? Let me give you an overly simplistic view of the CPI. Suppose that a typical household purchases 10 apples, 5 gallons of gas, and 3 pairs of jeans. I want to know overall if prices are rising. To answer this question, I need to know what this market basket cost initially and what it costs now. Let's say that in our base year, this is our benchmark year, which will serve as our point of reference, the price of an apple is 20 cents, the price of a gallon of gas is $1, and the price of a pair of jeans is $10. This means that in the base year, the market basket would have cost $37, $2 to purchase 10 apples at 20 cents each, $5 to purchase 5 gallons of gas at $1 each, and $30 to buy 3 pairs of jeans at $10 each. And in the current year, let's say that in the current year, an apple costs 70 cents, a gallon of gas costs $4, and a pair of jeans costs $30. This means that in the current year, the same market basket would cost $117, $7 for the apples, $20 for the gas, and $90 for the 3 pairs of jeans. Because the entire cost of the market basket is higher than it used to be, this means that overall, the price level must have gone up. In this particular example, this seems to be belaboring the obvious. We can see that each individual price has gone up, so overall, the average level of prices must have gone up. But this market basket approach is useful if we can't see individual prices, or if, as is the case for the actual CPI, there are hundreds of products with some prices rising and some prices falling. How does the market basket idea help us in finding a price index or some indicator of what's happening to the overall level of prices? In this example, we can use the changing value of the market basket to construct a CPI, where the CPI for the year in question is the ratio of the total expenditure in that year over the original total expenditure, or the expenditure in the base or benchmark year, and then I have to multiply all of it times 100. In this case, that would be a current expenditure of $117 over the base year expenditure of only $37 times 100. This means the CPI for the current year is about 316. Okay, so I can train just about anyone to plug the numbers into this formula. In the end, what does a CPI of 316 mean? Before I answer this question, let me ask you one more thing. What is the CPI of the base year? Well, since the CPI we seek is base year CPI, we have to take base year expenditures over base year expenditures all times 100. The CPI of the base year is going to be 100. What does this mean? It means that base year prices are 100% of base year prices. The prices are neither higher nor lower than when we started. Of course this is true. No change in the price level has yet occurred. In the base year, the index is always 100. This helps me to interpret index numbers that are not 100. If you find an index less than 100, then prices have decreased compared to the base year. If you find a price index more than 100, prices have gone up compared to the base year. Back to our current price index of 316 then, it signifies that prices are over 3 times higher than they were originally. If a price index, like the CPI, indicates the current level of prices, how do we measure changes in the price level? First of all, we're going to need to look at percentage change rather than absolute change. Let me show you what I mean. If I tell you that product price has gone up by $1, is this a big change or a small change? Well, as usual, it depends. If we're talking about, say, a pack of gum, where the original price was $1 and the new price is $2, that is an absolute change of $1. But is it a big change or a small change? This would be a big change. Price doubled or increased by 100%. What if instead we're talking about a textbook? If the book originally cost $100 and now it's $101, that's an absolute change of $1. But is it a big change or a small change? For the book, it's a small change. Price increased by 1%. In the end, we need to know not only the dollar amount of the price change, but also how this compares to where we started. The same is true of the overall price level. We need to look at percentage change of the price index. The formula to calculate the percentage change in the overall price level is the difference between the new CPI and the old CPI, all over the old CPI, times 100 to get it in percentage terms. How do I use this formula? Well, let's use the CPI numbers we calculated earlier as an example. The percentage change in price is the new CPI, 316, minus the old CPI, 100, over 100, times 100 to get it in percentage terms, or an increase of 216%. This means that prices have risen 216% from the base year to the current year. At this point, you may be asking yourself, why do we have to use this stupid formula? I could have gotten the same answer by just taking the difference between the two CPIs. While that's true for this particular example, that little trick only works if you're comparing against the base year. Let me show you. What if I want to know how much inflation there was, that is, how much prices changed, from 1998 to 2008? In 1998, the CPI was 163. The CPI in 2008 was 215.3. The index is higher, so clearly the general price level has increased, but by how much? It's tempting to just take the difference between the two and say that inflation was 52.3% over the 10-year period, but that would be incorrect. Note that 1998 is not the base year. How do I know that neither of the 2 years is the base year? Okay, let's use the formula. Percentage change in price from 1998 to 2008 is the CPI in 2008 minus the old CPI in 1998 all over the CPI in 98 times 100, or 215.3 minus 163 over 163 times 100, which gives us approximately a 32.1% increase in the price level from 1998 to 2008, not a 52.3% increase. By definition, inflation is a sustained increase in the overall level of prices. If the percentage change in the prices is greater than 0 for a sustained period, typically 2 consecutive quarters, that's 6 months or longer, we call it inflation. If the percentage change in price is less than 0 for a sustained period, we call it deflation. Think back to the first macroeconomic goal, stable prices. Notice that the goal is not low prices. Deflation or decreasing prices can be just as dangerous as inflation or increasing prices. Think about this. Lower prices mean smaller quantity supplied of all goods and services. This means there's less need for labor, so workers get laid off. Unemployed workers spend less, bringing demand and prices down, which means lower quantity supplied, which means, well, you get the picture. In fact, the one decade in the 20th century that was characterized worldwide by deflation was the 1930s, the Great Depression. Next time, real income.
Okay, so that explains the inflation. So basically that was helpful with regard to understanding it. So maybe we can watch one last video about unemployment as we discussed it also. Let me see how much time we have. Yeah, maybe we can watch that and then we discuss your final project and also your presentations. Let me show you the unemployment video as well. Yeah, we watch one more video and it's unemployment.
Why should stable prices Now that we know the term unemployed, why should stable Remember that there are 3 macroeconomic goals that we want to keep an eye on. 1, stable prices. 2, low unemployment. And 3, high and sustained growth. We've already addressed goal number 1, stable prices. What about goal number 2, low unemployment? Before I can think about what low unemployment means, I have to understand what unemployment itself means. What does it mean to be unemployed? The first response that I get from most people when I ask this question is, you're unemployed if you don't have a job. Well, this is not entirely accurate, but I'll need to back up several steps to show you why. First of all, in any country, let's use the U.S. as an example. How big is the labor force? Initially, you might think that our labor force encompasses our entire population, but that's not really true, is it? In the U.S., aren't there people who aren't allowed to work? Look at my family. 2 of the 3 people living in my household have a job, 1 does not. Is that third person unemployed? No, because she's under the age of 16, and child labor laws largely exclude those under 16 years of age from the labor force. Well, does that mean that everyone aged 16 and over is part of the labor force? No, because those who are institutionalized are not in the labor force, and those serving in the military are not counted in the labor force. Are these people providing a service? Well, certainly. Is it a service that we sell, therefore generating additional national income like other goods and services that we produce? No. Okay, so surely everyone who's 16 or over, not in the military and not institutionalized, is considered part of the labor force, right? No, because now we get to those who choose not to be in the labor force. Retirees, stay-at-home parents, full-time students who can afford not to work. So in the end, our labor force is that part of our population who are over 16, not in the military, not institutionalized, and have not chosen to opt out of the workforce. Now, the labor force has two components: people who are working and people without jobs who are looking for work. This latter category is the unemployed. Those who are unemployed are not working, but are seeking work. The unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the total number in the labor force. Remember, the total number in the labor force is the people who have jobs plus the unemployed. U.S. labor force participation is about 50%, meaning that about half the U.S. population is either working or actively seeking work. So in late 2009, the labor force was about 150 million out of a population of 300 million, and the national unemployment rate was approaching 10%. In the end, about 15 million people wanting to work were out searching for work. Next time, types of unemployment.
Okay, stop here, videos.
Now that we know the term unemployment,
You'll need to see the types of unemployment. Okay.
employed means not working but seeking work. You need to recognize it.
Okay, so let's get back to the last. So business cycles, recessions occurred during mid-70s, 82, and like different business cycles, they experience different economic growth, inflation. This is like an overview of the U.S. economic growth, inflation, and cycles. For Afghanistan, you could have the same. Like there was a period of time, like right now, Afghanistan is experiencing economic growth. So that will be the end of these slides. Let's go to your questions here. Basically, for your final project, you still don't have the slides 3 and 7. Okay, sure, I will send you an email, and that's interesting. I emailing them all. So let's see here if you don't have them. Let's see, slides 3 and 4. Okay, sure, I'll send you slides 3 and 4 in email. So let's go ahead and discuss this final project you have. So there are 6 questions. Out of these 6 questions, I expect you to answer 4 of the questions. Oh, where's the question number 6? Okay. Let's see. I believe the one I sent you was one with 6 questions.
It's in the page 2, I think.
Do you have the? Yes, that's right here. Okay. Yes. Okay. So question number 6 is also there. So out of these 6 questions, please make sure you choose only 4, or I mean, you can answer all the 6 if you want, but you'll be scored by only the first 4 that you answer. So these questions are for your finals. So you can write as many pages as you want, but make sure you have minimum of 2 pages for for your answers for each of the questions, and make sure you cover as much as you can. Like when there is a question on an economic aspect, try to look at it as many aspects as you can. Like if if it's microeconomic or macroeconomic, or you can look at it at both angles. Make sure you cover that. So one question could be specifically about demand, like individual demand, so it would be a microeconomic topic, but you would be able to look at it as a macroeconomic perspective as well. So make sure you cover that, because that's important. So this is your final, so it's like an open book kind of exam that you have up until April 30th to answer. So get back to me by email, but if you want, you can email it to me earlier. You don't have to wait until April 30th. But because of some problems that I'm experiencing with the late submission, I want to be upfront. If there is any late submission, like if 30th, I receive a paper on 31st, that will not be accepted at all, and it will be a reject and failure. So you have to take the course again. I will not accept any late submission from now on, because I have been experiencing a lot of problems. People sending me their papers like a month after it's due and all that. So I think that's enough, and there's no late submission accepted. I either get it by April 30th or it's going to be a failed exam. So I want to be clear about that. So do you have any questions? Any questions? Any comments? Okay, beautiful. So this will be your final paper, and next session, I expect all of you to present an individual presentation on one of the topics that we have covered. No, so I think it's enough. Like April 30th is enough. By end of April, we are supposed to get it, and it's it's very reasonable. You have more than 2 weeks to work on it, so I think that's good enough. Yeah, you can work besides your thesis. You can work on this as well. I mean, this should be reasonable. You can, as long as you spend like 15 minutes, half hour a day, you would be definitely good and are ready to submit. So there is no extension and no late submission provided. I'm sorry. Yes, on individual presentation, you can choose any topic. Yeah, end of April, you have many courses, and you need to submit all of those. You've been working on your thesis, I imagine, from a long time ago. So there is no extension provided. It's just end of April. I expect that individual final. It's just 4 of these questions I expect you to answer. So it's very reasonable. I will not give you any extension, and that's about it. I expect it by 30th. Those who do not submit by 30th need to retake the course, and it's going to be considered a failure, and I will not accept any late papers. Yes, I totally understand that. You can absolutely do that. You're all professionals. You're individuals who are able to multitask, do a lot of things together. So this is one of the jobs. Suppose this is a project that your boss just came to you and say, this is what I need from you. So you have this time limit. I won't accept any late submission, and no like bargaining or argument on the date. This is a set date, and this is all the questions are there. So you are flexible. You're attending the classes. Some of you sometimes do not attend the class and all that. But this is what I expect from you. Suppose it's your final exam. Suppose I give you this at your right now, and you're supposed to answer that in 3 hours. So I don't accept it. I mean, if you can't do it, I would just suggest you take it again next semester. No, I don't have any flexibility with the final project, not anymore, because I've been experiencing a lot of difficulties, and from this semester on, I will not accept any late papers and no extension. That's final. So that's about it. And if you're not able to submit that by then, I would definitely suggest taking the course again and do it again. Okay. So any other questions or comments except asking for any extensions because it will not be granted? This is not late. I've been very flexible. It's not because of that. You know, when you attend a class, when you go to college, you're taking an MBA course. You know, you got to be responsible for the course you take. And when lecturer give you an assignment or a project and give you the time limit, you got to finish it with that time limit. There's no, I mean, you could do it within a day. You could, had I given you this and I would say I want it by tomorrow, you have to submit it to me by tomorrow. Now I'm giving you 2 weeks, and that's good enough. So if you are not able to do that, it means that you're not probably ready to pass this course. You probably need to take it again, or maybe you're at the wrong class. Yeah, you're welcome to express your ideas, but it's up to the lecturer whether I give you the extension or not, and I'm not giving it to anybody. Okay, that's about it. So as I said, April 30th, for those of you who want to pass this course, I expect that and I want to receive it. And for those of you who cannot submit, unfortunately, you will fail the course. Okay, thank you very much. Beautiful. I appreciate that you're thinking about others, but others can express their own concerns. So just focus on your final project, and thank you.